When did you flip the script on someone who controlled you? My best friend's ex-boyfriend took my phone at 2 a.m., saying I was obsessing over finding her while hiding my dead best friend's bracelet in his car. When I demanded he explain, he smiled and said, "This is for your own good." That was 18 months ago. Yesterday, he tried to bargain with my parents, begging them to make me stop. My best friend is the reason why I believe that soulmates don't always have to be romantic. The first time we met at summer camp, we made each other friendship bracelets that we swore to never take off. So 5 years later, when search and rescue found her bracelet tangled by the lake, I knew my other half was gone. It didn't matter how many times I heard the words, "It's not your fault." I felt like an unalive single day. Matthew started showing up 2 weeks after the memorial service. He dated Sophia sophomore year for like 3 months. Ancient history, but suddenly he was at my door with a Starbucks coffee, oat milk latte, 2 pumps of vanilla, exactly how I liked it. "Thought you could use this?" he said. I wanted to tell him to F off, but Mom practically pulled him inside. Dad kept patting his shoulder and saying how mature he was for checking on me when he was grieving too. They were drowning in their own fear about losing me to depression, and here was Matthew throwing them a lifeline. 2 weeks later, he had his own key. My parents were obsessed with him bringing dinner and making sure I actually ate. "Such a good boy," Mom kept saying. Going through the same loss, but still taking care of our girl. I was too dead inside to care that he'd basically moved in. I spent every night texting Sophia's number about stupid stuff, even though she'd never answer. Sometimes I'd hear Matthew downstairs making my parents laugh, and I'd literally want to scream because how could anyone laugh when Sophia was gone? School became Matthew's domain. He drove me there every morning and rearranged his whole schedule to match mine. When I kept Sophia's side of our locker decorated with photos from the swim team and homecoming, he sat me down in the hallway. "This isn't healthy," he said, while taking down her pictures. "She wouldn't want you torturing yourself." The worst part was how he'd sigh whenever I cried. "You're disrespecting her memory by wallowing." So I learned to cry in the shower. I wore her hoodie under my jacket and listened to our shared playlist with earbuds he didn't know about. Everything shifted the week before my 18th birthday. Mom mentioned my grandmother's trust fund over dinner and how it would help with college. I barely heard her, but I saw Matthew's eyes light up before he caught himself. That's when I started noticing things. How he'd ask subtle questions about the amount. How he'd talk about our future like it was already decided. When I told him I wanted to use the money to hire professional investigators to look for Sophia, his whole face changed. "That money is for my future. Ours. It's for our future," he said slowly. "College together. An apartment. Sophia is gone, and wasting your inheritance won't bring her back." He was already walking away thinking that I would give in, but he was wrong. Because dead or alive, Sophia was my person. Well, less than 24 hours after our conversation ended, he told my parents I was having delusions. He called our whole friend group saying I was spiraling. They staged an intervention with a therapist who specialized in complicated grief. Even Sophia's parents showed up to tell me I needed to let their daughter rest in peace. I tried to access my trust early anyway, but Matthew had already convinced my parents to require their signature until I was mentally stable. When I screamed that he never really loved Sophia, he smacked his steering wheel so hard it cracked. 2 nights later, he took my freaking phone, said I was using it to obsess over finding her. I waited until everyone was asleep and snuck out to his car to get it back. And that's when my hand hit something familiar. I recognized it instantly. It was Sophia's friendship bracelet. The one with pink, purple, and blue. The one she wore on her ankle. The one that was supposedly never found. My head was spinning because this meant that the bracelet by the lake had been planted. My body was moving faster than my mind could process anything. And next thing I knew, I was running barefoot through the neighborhood at 2 a.m. Her mom found me collapsed on their porch, holding the bracelet and screaming that Matthew unalived her. I kept saying he planted evidence, but I was crying too hard to make sense. Matthew showed up with my parents and 2 police officers. He played the concerned boyfriend perfectly, telling them I'd been getting worse all week. I looked like the crazy, depressed girlfriend. As he guided me toward the police car for psychiatric evaluation, Sophia's 12-year-old brother Connor ran outside. While Matthew was distracted talking to the officers, Connor shoved something in my pocket. Sophia said, "If anything happened, give this to you," he whispered. "Not him. Only you." It was a flash drive, small, black, with a piece of tape that had backup written in Sophia's handwriting. The police car smelled like stale coffee and disinfectant. Matthew sat in the front passenger seat, occasionally glancing back at me through the metal grate while talking to the officers about my deteriorating mental state. I kept my hand pressed against my pocket, feeling the outline of the flash drive through the fabric. The psychiatric facility looked like a converted office building. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as they led me through the intake process. Matthew stayed close, his hand on my elbow, playing the concerned boyfriend for the staff. During the evaluation, he told the intake nurse about my delusions and obsessive behavior. I watched him pull out his phone while the nurse asked me questions about suicidal ideation. He typed quickly, thinking I was too focused on answering to notice, but I saw the message preview. She has it. They assigned me to a room with pale yellow walls and a narrow bed. The nurse explained the visiting hours and daily schedule while Matthew nodded along, asking questions about my treatment plan. When she left to get my medication, he leaned close. "This is for your own good," he whispered. "Once you're better, we can move forward with our plans." The first night was the longest. I lay awake clutching the flash drive, which I'd managed to hide inside my pillowcase during the room search. Every time a staff member walked past my door, I tensed up, expecting them to somehow know what I was hiding. Morning brought group therapy and supervised breakfast. During the introductions, I noticed a girl about my age watching me intently. She had swimmer shoulders and chlorine-damaged hair. When the session ended, she caught up to me in the hallway. "You're Sophia's friend," she said quietly, glancing around to make sure no staff were nearby. I knew her from swim team. We competed against each other. Junior year. My throat tightened. I nodded. "I never believed she drowned," she whispered. "Sophia was the strongest swimmer I knew. Be careful who you trust here. Some of the staff report everything back to visitors. Visiting hours came too soon." Matthew arrived with my parents, carrying flowers and wearing his best concerned expression. We sat in the common area under staff supervision. He spoke loudly about wanting me to get better, about how much he cared about our future together, but when the nurse turned to answer another patient's question, he slipped a piece of paper across the table. I unfolded it carefully. "Give me the drive or this gets worse." My hand started shaking. The nurse noticed immediately. "I think she needs some space," the nurse said, standing up. "Visits can be overwhelming in the early stages of treatment." Matthew's jaw clenched, but he maintained his act. Of course, whatever's best for her recovery. After he left, I remembered something Connor had said months ago during one of our family dinners. He'd been talking about a school project, and Sophia had helped him with the computer part. "She showed me how to back things up to the cloud," he'd said, in case my laptop crashed. Computer privilege time was limited to 30 minutes daily, supervised by staff. I sat at one of the ancient desktops, pretending to write in the online journal they encouraged us to keep. My fingers trembled as I navigated to a cloud storage site. I tried different password combinations, thinking of inside jokes and shared memories. Then I remembered the fort we'd built in her backyard the summer after 6th grade. We named it Fort Ethereal because we thought it sounded magical. The password worked. The account opened to dozens of folders, all dated within the last year. My heart pounded as I clicked on one labeled insurance. Inside were videos, photos, and documents. I glanced at the staff member supervising the computer room. She was helping another patient with their journal. I clicked on a video file, keeping the volume muted. Sophia's face filled the screen. She was sitting in her bedroom wearing the ankle bracelet. The timestamp showed 3 weeks before the camping trip. During my next phone privilege, I noticed a missed call notification from Connorung's mom. My hands shook as I dialed their number. "Hello." Connorung's mom sounded tired. "It's me," I said quietly, aware of the staff member standing nearby. "Oh, honey, how are you?" Matthew was just here. He was asking Connor about some drive. He seemed really upset. What's going on? My mind raced. I had to protect Connor and the flash drive. Can I talk to Connor? There was shuffling. Then Connorung's voice came through. "Hey, listen carefully," I said, keeping my voice casual for the staff member's benefit. "If Matthew comes back, tell him you don't know what he's talking about. Tell him the drive is hidden at school in my locker. Can you do that?" "Yeah," Connor said. "I can do that." The next few days blurred together. Medication rounds, group therapy, individual sessions with a psychiatrist who kept asking about my fixation on Sophia's death. I played along, saying what they wanted to hear, counting down to my next computer privilege. When it finally came, I plugged in the flash drive while pretending to type in my journal. The staff member was across the room helping. Someone print out a letter. I opened the first file. A video labeled important. Sophia appeared on screen again. This time, she looked scared. I could see her bedroom window behind her. Dark outside, she was whispering. "I found out what Matthew's planning," she said, glancing toward her door. "He found out about her trust fund. He's been researching it for weeks. I have screenshots of his searches, copies of documents he thought he deleted. He doesn't know I know his laptop password. I quickly closed the video as the staff member started walking back toward me. My roommate, a woman in her 30s who'd barely spoken since I arrived, was watching me. When the staff member passed, she slid a piece of paper across the space between our computer stations. Delete the history. They check everything. I nodded and quickly cleared the browser history before my time was up. Matthew returned for the next family session with my parents. They looked exhausted, stress etched into every line of their faces. We sat in a small conference room with a therapist who specialized in family dynamics. She's been hiding evidence of her delusions, Matthew told the therapist. I think we should search her belongings for her own safety. Mom reached across the table and squeezed my hand. The doctor says you need to stay for the full 72-hour hold minimum. Please, just cooperate, sweetheart. We just want you to get better. I wanted to scream to show them the videos to make them understand. But I knew how it would look. A grieving girl already committed for psychiatric evaluation, claiming her boyfriend was involved in her best friend's death. I had to be smarter. The search turned up nothing. I'd hidden the flash drive inside a tear in the mattress, a spot my swimmer roommate had shown me. Matthew's frustration was visible despite his attempts to hide it. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Sophia's videos, about the evidence she'd collected. She'd known something was wrong. She'd tried to protect me, and somehow Matthew had found out. 3 days felt like 3 years. When my parents finally came to take me home, Matthew was with them. He sat in the front seat of Dad's car, turning around periodically to check on me with fake concern. We've set up some new ground rules, Dad said as we drove. Matthew explained that you've been fixated on that bracelet. The one they found by the lake was verified by police. It had her DNA on it. I stared out the window. The flash drive now tucked inside my shoe. Every mile that took me further from the hospital felt like a step deeper into a trap. Back home, things were different. My laptop was gone. My phone was replaced with a basic model that could only call pre-programmed numbers. Matthew had convinced my parents that limiting my internet access would help my recovery. A text came through from an unknown number. Your mom gave me your diary to help understand your grief. These pages about Matthew are concerning. We should discuss treatment options. My diary, the one I'd hidden under my mattress, the one where I'd written about feeling uncomfortable with how fast Matthew had inserted himself into our lives. My private thoughts weaponized against me. Matthew's control expanded daily. He convinced my parents he needed to monitor my social media for warning signs. They gave him all my passwords without question. When my college called about fall enrollment, he intercepted the call. I found out later he'd sent an email from my account deferring admission for mental health reasons. The family therapist was the final blow. Matthew's mother had recommended her, claiming she specialized in grief counseling. But sitting in her office, listening to her dismiss my concerns as patterns that weren't there, I realized the truth. She didn't know about Matthew's connection to her. To her, I was just another grieving teenager creating conspiracy theories to avoid accepting loss. Matthew scheduled additional therapy sessions, telling my parents I was resisting treatment. I recognized the isolation tactic from psychology class, but knowing didn't make it easier to fight. I started documenting everything in a hidden notebook Emma gave me during our coffee meeting. Emma had risked Matthew's wrath by meeting me at the local cafe. She'd noticed gaps in his story about the camping trip timeline. Matthew had texted me about joining us, insisting we all needed to support each other. I'd shown Emma the text, and she'd immediately created a diversion by posting on social media that we were at a different location. The breakthrough came when Sophia's mom contacted me after Emma mentioned our meeting. She needed to talk without Matthew present. We met at the park where Sophia and I used to practice for swim meets. Her hands shook as she pulled out her phone and showed me doorbell camera footage from the night before the camping trip. The timestamp read 3:12 a.m. Matthew stood at their front door, and in the window behind him, Sophia's terrified face was visible for just a moment before the curtain dropped. I showed the footage to Mom when we got home. Her faith in Matthew wavered for the first time. She kept asking why Sophia hadn't told anyone if she was scared. I wanted to shake her to make her understand how Matthew operated, but I stayed calm and pointed out the timeline inconsistencies. My investigation led me back to Sophia's social media. Emma had taken screenshots before the posts were deleted. One from 3 days before the camping trip simply read, "Feeling unsafe." The comments were gone, but Emma remembered Sophia had been vague when pressed for details. The family lawyer refused to review our evidence, claiming that without police interest, it was just family drama and conspiracy theories. His dismissal stung, but it pushed me to dig deeper. Connor became my unexpected ally. We bonded over our shared loss, And eventually he admitted Sophia had given him something for safekeeping the night before she left for camping. He called it her insurance. Hidden in his room, we found Sophia's second phone. The messages to a crisis hotline made my stomach turn. She'd written about her ex finding out about her friend's inheritance. Matthew's pattern became clearer when Claire reached out through Emma's post about the situation. She'd dated Matthew freshman year and had documentation of his attempts to isolate her. We met at the mall where she calmly presented dated texts and emails. The similarities to my situation were undeniable. With my 18th birthday approaching in 1 week, Matthew increased the pressure. He told my parents I needed inpatient treatment, painting my evidence gathering as dangerous obsession. The race against time for my trust fund access had begun. Sophia's mom made another discovery that changed everything. On an old iPad, she found a voice memo from her daughter. Sophia's shaking voice filled the room as she said that if something happened to her, Matthew had threatened her that night he knew about the trust fund. Cheer. Our next family dinner, Connor mentioned Sophia's insurance while Matthew was serving dessert. His composure cracked for just a moment, his hand freezing mid-reach. My parents noticed the mask was slipping. Matthew tried a new approach through Mom. He offered a deal. I could have my trust fund if I stopped spreading lies about Sophia. Dad overheard the conversation from the hallway. For the first time, he questioned Matthew's motives, asking why he was negotiating about my inheritance when he was supposed to be helping. I spent hours analyzing the timeline of Sophia's research. She discovered Matthew looking up trust fund laws weeks before her death. The premeditation evidence was mounting. I realized Matthew only controlled my parents and the therapist. Sophia's family and our friends increasingly believed the evidence. The bank security footage was the smoking firearm. It showed Matthew attempting to social engineer information about my trust fund before Sophia died. He'd been planning this for months. Emma risked everything by posting public support for me. She chose our friendship over her safety from Matthew's retaliation. We spent late nights at her house organizing evidence, our friendship strengthening through shared purpose. When Matthew pressured me to falsify evidence against him to make the situation go away, I refused. The truth was enough. His desperation was showing. During a therapy session, the therapist asked Matthew to clarify his camping trip timeline. He contradicted his earlier story, and even the therapist noticed. The professional doubt in her eyes gave me hope. Sophia's mom accessed her daughter's backup email and found drafts describing Matthew's escalating behavior. He'd become obsessed with my money, and Sophia had been documenting everything. The evidence painted a picture of a predator who'd underestimated his victim's intelligence. Matthew's parents called mine after Claire contacted them about their son's behavior patterns. Their concern added weight to our claims. The community started comparing notes in a group chat Emma created. Matthew's inconsistencies multiplied as people shared their interactions with him. Sophia's family hired a private investigator while my friends started crowdfunding for legal consultation. The support network was growing stronger than Matthew's web of control. The confrontation came when Matthew cornered me at home. His mask fully dropped as he said I had no idea what he was capable of. He didn't realize Dad was recording from the doorway. The threat was captured. Undeniable. That night, my parents apologized privately. They'd been so terrified of losing me too that they couldn't see what was happening. The family healing could finally begin. Matthew's options shrank as his workplace received concerned calls about his behavior from multiple sources. His professional reputation crumbled alongside his personal control. Claire revealed the full pattern during a support group meeting. Matthew had been stalking trust fund recipients, threatening them into submission, but Sophia was the first who wouldn't back down. She died protecting me. I made sure Connor stayed with relatives while the investigation intensified. Protecting the vulnerable became my priority. Sophia's extended family, school friends, and swim team formed a protective network around me. Matthew's attempts to recruit new allies failed as his reputation spread through community whisper networks. Dad witnessed Matthew's violence barely contained when he screamed at Mom about ruining everything. The mask was completely gone. Even the school counselor advocated for me with the college admissions office after reviewing the timeline. The private investigator uncovered that Matthew had changed his last name after his father's bankruptcy, trying to distance himself from the family scandal. His obsession with wealth stemmed from his own family's downfall. My birthday approached in 48 hours. The psychiatric evaluation Matthew had scheduled conflicted with my trust fund access. The race intensified. Our family doctor reviewed my history and declared Matthew's therapy recommendations inappropriate and potentially harmful. The stakes crystallized beyond just justice for Sophia. Stopping Matthew meant preventing future victims. During a chance encounter at the store, I handled his provocations calmly. My visible growth and control frustrated him further. Even the therapist expressed concerns about Matthew's involvement after a colleague mentioned the conflict of interest. Professional ethics finally entered the conversation. Truth spread organically through the community as evidence circulated. Matthew became unwelcome at his usual locations. Social consequences mounted faster than legal ones. I secured notarized statements from multiple witnesses, building a legal foundation for whatever came next. Matthew responded by filing a restraining order claiming harassment, attaching out-of-context messages to paint me as the aggressor. The judge reviewed the evidence and dismissed Matthew's petition. Her words rang through the courtroom as she stated, these appeared to be reasonable responses to concerning behavior. The legal system finally saw through his manipulation. Matthew lost his job after HR investigated multiple complaints about aggressive behavior. The consequences were mounting faster now. My family began therapy with a new counselor, specializing in trauma and manipulation. Real healing could begin. Sophia's college friend arrived with crucial information. She'd received a call the night before the camping trip. Sophia had been recording everything on her phone. The friend had kept the voicemails, afraid to come forward until now. The pattern emerged clearly. Matthew had studied trust fund law, identified vulnerable targets, but underestimated Sophia's support system. His predatory behavior had finally met its match. Matthew's mother provided the final piece. She admitted he'd been obsessed with wealth since his father's bankruptcy. Her regret was palpable as she shared how she should have seen the warning signs. A community gathering at Sophia's family home allowed witnesses to share their experiences. The truth became undeniable as person after person spoke up. The documentation packet compiled through group effort created a comprehensive timeline of Matthew's deception. Connor revealed that Sophia's phone had been recording in her pocket during her final argument with Matthew. The audio captured threats, but no video. Still, his voice was clear, his intentions undeniable. Both families and community leaders united in supporting me. Matthew's isolation was complete. His desperate accusation that I had pushed Sophia and he'd been protecting everyone fell apart immediately. Security footage showed me passed out in my tent during the time of Sophia's death. Some community members briefly questioned if there was more to the story. I had to defend myself without my parents' immediate support as they processed Matthew's wild accusation. Standing alone, I decided to present all evidence at a community meeting rather than hiding behind lawyers or parents. The truth cascade began as Matthew's other targets felt safe to share their experiences. Each story added weight to the pattern of predation. The emergency meeting at the high school auditorium brought everyone together. Matthew arrived with his parents, cornered with nowhere left to hide. The auditorium filled quickly with concerned community members. I stood at the front with Emma beside me, organizing the evidence. Packets we'd prepared. Matthew entered with his parents, his usual confidence replaced by something darker. His mother wouldn't meet anyone's eyes. I began presenting the timeline methodically. The doorbell footage played on the projection screen. Sophia's terrified face in the window caused gasps throughout the room. Matthew jumped up, knocking over his chair. He rushed toward the laptop, controlling the presentation, but several fathers from the swim team blocked his path. His interruptions grew more frantic as I continued. Each piece of evidence stripped away another layer of his carefully constructed image. When I played the audio from Sophia's phone, his voice threatening her about my trust fund. The room went completely silent. Matthew's final attempt at control came through desperation. He started shouting about loan sharks, about debts his father had left behind after the bankruptcy. He claimed he'd only wanted to borrow the money temporarily, that Sophia had overreacted. His mother finally stood up, her voice shaking but clear. She confirmed his gambling problem had started in high school. She'd been covering for him, hoping he'd change. The community's response was immediate and unified. Sophia's father stood first, followed by dozens of others. They formed a wall between Matthew and me. Someone had already called the private security firm that patrolled our neighborhood. They arrived within minutes. Matthew agreed to leave permanently when faced with the collective determination of the community. The restraining orders filed by multiple families would create a legal barrier across several counties. His mother promised to ensure he entered a treatment program in another state. She also pledged to establish a fund for other victims of financial manipulation. Connor approached me as Matthew was escorted out. He pulled something from his pocket, Sophia's real friendship bracelet, the one she'd hidden with him for safekeeping. The pink, purple, and blue threads were faded but intact. He explained she'd switched it with a duplicate before the camping trip, knowing Matthew might try to use it against me somehow. My 18th birthday arrived 2 days later. The trust fund became accessible without interference. The bank manager, who'd been following the community situation, expedited the paperwork. I immediately began the process of establishing Sophia's Memorial Scholarship Fund. The scholarship committee formed naturally from those who'd supported me. Emma A. became co-chair, bringing her organizational skills to honor our friend's memory. We focused on supporting young women interested in competitive swimming and water safety education. Matthew's other victims began reaching out through the network we'd established. 3 more young women shared similar experiences of financial manipulation and isolation tactics. We created a private support system, sharing resources and validation. The community's response extended beyond just removing Matthew. Neighbors who'd been distant before now checked in regularly. The isolation he'd crafted around me dissolved as genuine connections reformed. My parents joined a support group for families affected by manipulative relationships. College admission was reinstated after the admissions office reviewed the documentation of Matthew's interference. They offered additional support services and connected me with campus resources for survivors of psychological abuse. The dean personally called to ensure I felt safe returning to my educational path. 6 months passed before I felt ready to visit the lake where Sophia's bracelet had been planted. Emma came with me along with Connor and his mother. We held a proper memorial, tossing flowers into the water while sharing favorite memories. Connor revealed that Sophia had taught him water safety skills that summer, almost like she knew he'd need to be strong. The investigation into Sophia's death remained technically open, though without Matthew's confession, legal justice seemed unlikely. But the community justice we'd achieved felt more complete. He couldn't hurt anyone else, and his pattern of predation had been exposed and documented. I used part of the trust fund to hire a forensic accountant who discovered Matthew had targeted 2 other trust fund recipients in neighboring towns before meeting me. The information was shared with those communities, creating an even wider network of awareness. My parents' transformation was gradual but genuine. They attended every therapy session, read books about manipulation tactics, and slowly rebuilt trust. Dad installed new locks and security cameras, not out of paranoia, but as a gesture of protection he wished he'd provided earlier. The therapist, who dismissed my concerns, faced professional review after multiple families filed complaints. She hadn't known about Matthew's mother's connection to her practice, but her failure to recognize manipulation tactics raised serious questions about her competence. On the first anniversary of Sophia's death, the ESYEP Memorial Scholarship awarded its first recipients. 3 young swimmers received full funding for training camps and college preparation. Their joy felt like the best tribute to Sophia's protective spirit. Matthew's family followed through on their commitments. His mother sent quarterly updates about his treatment progress and the victim fund's growth. She never made excuses for him, but worked to provide resources for others caught in similar situations. The swimming pool where Sophia and I had practiced became a gathering place for healing. Parents who'd been deceived by Matthew found common ground with their children. The shared experience of manipulation created unexpected bonds throughout the community. I returned to swimming myself, something Matthew had discouraged. The water felt like connection to Sophia. During early morning laps, I could almost hear her counting strokes beside me. The swim team welcomed me back without questions, offering silent support through presence. Emma and I launched an awareness program at local high schools about financial manipulation and controlling relationships. We kept it simple and personal, sharing our story to help others recognize warning signs. The response overwhelmed us as students approached with their own concerns. Connor grew into his role as keeper of Sophia's memory. He started a water safety program for younger kids, teaching them the skills his sister had shared. His strength through grief inspired everyone who watched him transform pain into purpose. The trust fund, once a source of targeting, became a tool for protection. Beyond the scholarship, I funded legal consultations for manipulation victims and supported the development of educational resources. The money Matthew had obsessed over now worked against everything he represented. My return to normally was measured in small victories, sleeping through the night, laughing without guilt, trusting new people while maintaining healthy boundaries. Each milestone marked distance from Matthew's influence and closer alignment with who Sophia knew I could be. The community's vigilance never wavered. When a new family moved into Matthew's old house, neighbors shared the story as a cautionary tale. The network we'd built to expose him evolved into a support system that protected vulnerable members. I kept Sophia's friendship bracelet in a special box beside my bed. Sometimes I wore it on difficult days, feeling her strength through the faded threads. Connor had been right to give it to me when justice was done. Not legal justice, but the kind Sophia would have appreciated. The final documentation of Matthew's pattern revealed he'd researched over a dozen potential targets before focusing on me. The meticulous planning showed true predatory behavior. This evidence was shared with law enforcement in multiple jurisdictions, creating a paper trail that would follow him wherever he went. 1 year later, I stood at the podium during Sophia's memorial scholarship ceremony. The auditorium was packed with families who'd learned to see truth, friends who'd never stopped believing, and Sophia's loved ones who'd found justice through community courage. Matthew remained exiled, monitored by the network of his victims. The trust fund he'd coveted now prevented predators from targeting grieving teens. Through fire, I'd gained wisdom. Through testing, bonds had proven true. Finally, free to grieve properly.